I always believed you were such a robust macho man. Turns out they come in every shape and size. Those were the words that froze me, slurred by a drunken Derek as we sat on his back deck. His insinuation was clear, yet it made little sense. My wife, Allie, and I had been married for 7 years. We had 2 handsome boys, a solid home, and a routine that worked. What are you talking about? I asked, trying to hide the unease creeping into my voice. He leaned back, took another swig of his beer, and smirked. You let your wife go out every week with Tina. What do you think they're doing? Chatting about work until midnight. I stared at him, the words not quite clicking. 2 months earlier, Allie had started going out on Wednesday nights with her co-workers. At first, she returned around 8 o'clock, and I didn't think much of it. But the outings stretched later and later. Lately, midnight had become the new norm. She always had a perfectly reasonable excuse. A dinner that ran long, a work problem to discuss. And she always showered the moment she got home, claiming Tina's cigarette smoke clung to her clothes. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Derek's drunken grin didn't fade. Oh, come on, man. Don't tell me you're that oblivious. They're hooking up with guys. Tall guys. I've seen the marks on Tina. It's not just girl talk, my friend. A chill crept down my spine, but I forced a laugh. You're drunk, Derek. You don't know what you're talking about. His expression turned serious for the first time that evening. I wish I didn't. But trust me, I know the routine. Tina started just like that. Girls' nights. Then came parties, then baby showers or weddings that lasted until 3 in the morning. Wait and see. Allie will follow the same path. The sound of laughter and footsteps from the kitchen cut our conversation short. Allie and Tina stepped onto the deck, each carrying a tray of snacks, their voices bright and carefree. Allie's smile was warm, genuine, the kind that always made me feel lucky to have her as my wife. But for the first time, doubt lurked beneath the surface. That night, back at home, I watched Allie put the boys to bed, her laughter filling the hallway as she read them their favorite bedtime story. When she finally joined me in bed, I was too preoccupied to respond to her touch. What's wrong? She asked, her blue eyes full of concern. Nothing. I lied. But something was undeniably wrong, and I couldn't shake it. The following Wednesday, Allie sent me a usual text. Heading out with Tina after work. Don't wait up. Love you. I fed the boys, tucked them into bed, and sat in the living room, my mind racing. Midnight came and went, and I felt the tension building in my chest. At 12:15, I heard her key in the door. I waited until she stepped into the room, before turning on the light. She jumped, clutching her chest. Marcus, you scare me. What are you doing up? Waiting for you, I said sharply. How was the Big Bull Club? Did you hook up with one of those tall studs Derek mentioned? Her face turned pale, then flushed with anger. What the hell are you talking about? Are you accusing me of cheating? I crossed my arms. I know where you've been, Allie. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. For a moment she faltered, but then a wicked smile crept across her face, a look I'd never seen before. So what? She said coldly. There's nothing you can do about it. If I want to sleep with every tall guy in the city, you'll just have to accept it. Divorce me, and I'll take everything, the house, the kids, your paycheck. You'll be stuck in a shabby apartment, eating canned food. So just get over it. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer, yet it wasn't expected anger or sorrow. It was a steely resolve. I watched as she turned and headed upstairs, already pulling off her clothes. I'm taking a shower, she called over her shoulder. And you better be there when I get to bed. You know I love to cuddle. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat in silence, staring at where she had stood. She thought she'd won, that I'd simply roll over and accept her twisted fantasy. But she was mistaken. I wasn't going to be the husband who waited and watched as his wife dismantled our marriage. If she believed there was nothing I could do, she was about to learn how wrong she was. Tomorrow, I'd begin putting my plan into motion. By the time I was done, Allie wouldn't even recognize the life she thought she controlled. The following morning, Allie acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed softly while making breakfast for boys, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, smiling brightly as though the confrontation the night before had never occurred. It was almost maddening. I couldn't focus at the office that day. Her words echoed in my mind. If I want to sleep with every tall guy in the city, you'll just have to accept it. I needed proof. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went. That evening, as Allie put the boys to bed, I went to her closet. I searched through her clothes until I found what I was looking for. Her Wednesday night outfits. Her dresses and tops carried a faint smell of smoke, just as she claimed. But something else caught my eye. One of her dresses had a slight tear along the hem, and another strap seemed unnaturally stretched. It wasn't conclusive, but it added to my suspicions. In the bathroom, I checked the laundry. As usual, her clothes were there, except for her underwear. It wasn't in the hamper. Instead, I found it hanging on the shower rail, freshly washed. Why would she wash her underwear separately? The next Wednesday, I decided to follow her. She sent her usual text. Out with Tina. Don't wait up. I kissed the boys goodnight, tucked them into bed, and waited until I saw Allie pull out of the driveway. My heart pounded as I grabbed my keys and followed her car from a safe distance. She didn't head to the usual restaurant she had mentioned. Instead, she drove across town to a club I'd never heard of. The bright neon sign read The Silver Palm, and the parking lot was packed. I parked down the street and watched as she got out of the car. She was dressed to impress, a tight red dress that accentuated her figure in a way that was undeniably provocative. Tina was waiting for her near the entrance, and together they disappeared into the club. The place was busy, with music thumping loud enough to make the walls vibrate. I slipped inside, keeping to the shadows. The air was heavy with cigarette smoke and the scent of alcohol. It didn't take long to spot Allie and Tina. They weren't sitting at a table. They were on the dance floor. Allie's movements were seductive, her body pressed against a man who towered over her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly enjoying her attention. Tina was nearby, similarly entwined with another man. My stomach churned as I watched. This wasn't a dinner with co-workers. This wasn't harmless fun. This was betrayal. I waited in the parking lot, hidden in my car, until they emerged from the club hours later. Allie was laughing, her arm draped around the man she'd been dancing with. Tina was cozy with her partner. They exchanged a few words, then piled into separate cars. Allie didn't come straight home. Instead, she drove to a small motel on the outskirts of town. My heart sank as I watched her disappear inside, her companion following close behind. When Allie finally returned around 4 a.m., I was waiting in the living room. She froze when she saw me, her makeup smudged and her hair disheveled. "Marcus," she said, her voice thick with exhaustion. "Why are you still up?" I didn't answer immediately, letting the silence stretch between us. "Did you have fun tonight?" I finally asked. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It was fine, just the usual dinner and drinks." I stood, slowly walking toward her. The usual dinner and drinks? At a club? With a man wrapped around you? Followed by a motel stop. Her expression shifted, a mix of surprise and defiance. "Were you following me?" I had to see for myself. I said coldly. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "Then you saw exactly what you needed to see. And as I said before, there's nothing you can do about it. This is my life now, Marcus. You can either accept it or leave. But if you leave, you'll lose everything." She turned and headed upstairs, leaving me standing in the darkened living room. I didn't sleep that night. Her arrogance, her complete disregard for our marriage, it ignited a fire inside me. She thought she was untouchable, that she could humiliate me and face no consequences. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to confront her again. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to make her pay. And by the time I was finished, Allie would regret every decision that had led her here. Over the next few days, I pretended everything was normal. Allie's arrogance only grew, and she seemed even more emboldened with each passing day. She'd smirk at me as she got ready for her Wednesday nights, daring me to say something. But I didn't need to say anything. I needed her to believe I was broken, compliant, defeated. By Monday, I had everything in place. The research I'd done over the past few days was enough to make me question the depths of human depravity. There were corners of the internet darker than I'd imagined, where anything or anyone could be bought and sold. Through my work in tech security, I'd spent years tracking cybercriminals. I knew how to navigate the dark web. It didn't take long to find exactly what I needed. The listing was simple. Fiery redhead, 26, blue eyes, flawless skin. Open to all arrangements. Serious inquiries only. Starting bid, $50,000. Attached was a carefully edited video of Allie, taken from a footage I'd recorded over the past week. Nothing explicit, just enough to showcase her beauty and allure. Within hours, the bids began rolling in. On Wednesday, as Allie got ready for her weekly outing, I decided to play my part. "You look stunning," I said as she twirled in front of the mirror, her tight black dress leaving little to the imagination. She smirked. "You're finally learning to appreciate me, Marcus. Maybe there's hope for you yet." "Maybe," I replied with a faint smile. As she left, I felt the cold resolve harden within me. That night, I finalized the deal. A man named Andre Johnson had won the bidding at $100,000. He was from the Democratic Republic of Congo and operated in a realm where rules didn't apply. We exchanged a series of encrypted messages, and he promised to make the arrangements. "She will be treated like royalty," he assured me. For a while, I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't care. The next few days passed in a blur. I treated Allie like a queen, showering her with affection and gifts. I wanted her to believe that everything was normal, better than normal. "See," she said one night as she curled up beside me on the couch. "This is what I've been waiting for. You're finally getting it." I smiled, but inside, I was counting down the days. By Saturday, everything was ready. Allie was packing for the vacation I'd planned, a trip to the Cape Verde Islands off the coast of Africa. She was thrilled at the idea of lounging on the beach and exploring new opportunities, as she put it. "You're going to love this," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "This is going to change everything for us." She had no idea how right she was. We arrived at the resort on Sunday evening. It was beautiful, a 4-star hotel with white sand beaches and crystal clear water. Allie was radiant, her excitement contagious as she twirled in the lobby, taking in the luxury around her. That night, we dined at the hotel restaurant. I introduced her to Andre, who was already waiting when we arrived. "Allie, this is Andre Johnson," I said with a smile. "He's a friend of mine." Andre stood, towering over us, his smile charming and disarming. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Allie," he said, taking her hand. "Marcus has told me so much about you." Allie blushed, her blue eyes sparkling. "It's lovely to meet you too." Dinner was a blur of conversation and laughter. Andre was captivating, and Allie was enraptured. By the time we finished, she hung on every word he said. "Why don't we continue this on my yacht?" Andre suggested as we sipped our after-dinner drinks. Allie's eyes lit up. "I'd love that." She didn't even glance at me as she left the restaurant with Andre, her hand nestled in his arm. That was the last time I saw my wife. Back at the hotel, I packed her belongings into her suitcases. One of Andre's men arrived shortly after to collect them. He handed me an envelope containing the remaining $100,000, nodded politely, and left without a word. I spent the rest of the week lounging on the beach and exploring the town. It was liberating, knowing that Allie was no longer my problem. When I flew home on our scheduled flight, I told the boys that their mother had decided to stay in Africa for a while. They didn't seem to question it, their young minds unable to grasp the full weight of what had occurred. 3 days later, Tina called, frantic and angry. "What did you do to her?" she screamed. "Nothing," I replied calmly. "She met someone and decided to stay. Ask her yourself." I hung up before she could respond. That night, as I sat in my man cave sipping whiskey, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Allie had thought she could destroy me, humiliate me, and walk away unscathed. She was wrong. The $100,000 went straight into a college fund for my boys. Revenge had never tasted so sweet. The week following Allie's departure for the vacation, past in surreal haze. I pretended life was normal for the boys' sake, but inside, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. She was gone out of my life, and she couldn't hurt me anymore. But I wasn't finished yet. On Wednesday, Tina called again, her voice laced with suspicion. "You're not returning my calls or texts, Marcus. You're lying to me. I know you've done something." "She's with someone new," I replied calmly, living her best life, just as she always wanted. "Isn't that what you encourage her to do?" Tina's silence was brief, but telling. "I don't believe you. I'm coming over." "Suit yourself," I said, hanging up. When she arrived later that evening, she brought backup, a detective who happened to be one of her friends. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore his badge clipped his belt like a prop. "Marcus," he said in a patronizing tone. "Tina is concerned about her friend Allie. She thinks something's happened to her." I crossed my arms, refusing to rise to the bait. "Nothing's happened. She met someone and she's staying in Africa. She even left her passport stamped as proof." I handed over a copy of the documents Andre had provided. The detective scanned the pages, his expression skeptical but contained. "And you're not at all worried about your wife staying behind?" he asked. "Why would I be?" I replied with a shrug. "She made her choice. Maybe you should ask Tina why she's so concerned." The detective didn't press further. Instead, he exchanged a glance with Tina, his hand briefly brushing her back as they turned to leave. Their visit confirmed what I'd suspected for weeks. Tina had been the catalyst for all this. She was the one who had introduced Allie to this twisted lifestyle, who had pushed her further down this path of destruction. She wasn't merely complicit. She was the root of the problem. That night, as the boys slept, I poured myself a drink and sat in the man cave, pondering my next move. I couldn't let Tina walk away unscathed. She'd sown chaos in my life, and it was only fitting that she experienced the same. The following day, I reached out to Andre. "I have another potential client for you," I said. He laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "You've been busy, Marcus. Tell me about her." "She's blonde, about 28, attractive but manipulative. She's the one who started all this. Think of her as a bonus." He considered my words for a moment before replying. "Send me her details. If she's as valuable as you say, I'll make it worth your while." I spent the next week gathering information, following Tina's movements just as I had Allie's. She was predictable. Wednesday nights at the same club, Saturdays spent at parties, and every interaction with Derek punctuated by her cold disdain. It didn't take long to piece together her routine, and with each step, I felt my plan falling perfectly into place. I crafted an email that appeared to be from Allie, inviting Tina to visit her in Africa. The message was carefully worded, dripping with the kind of enthusiasm Tina would expect from her former partner in crime. "Tina, you have to come visit me. My new life here is incredible luxury, excitement, and everything we ever dreamed of. I've already spoken to Andre, and he's eager to meet you. Leave Derek with the kids and come have the time of your life. Flights are on me. Love, Allie." It didn't take long for Tina to reply. "Allie, I'm so happy to hear from you. Your life sounds amazing. I'd love to come visit, but money's tight right now. Are you sure about the flights? Let me know." I confirmed the arrangements and forwarded the details to Andre. He was pleased with my efficiency and assured me everything would go smoothly. Tina left for Africa the following weekend, her departure as unceremonious as Allie's. Derek, clueless as ever, called me a few days later, his voice a mix of confusion and relief. "She sent me an email saying she's not coming back," he said. "Do you know anything about this?" "I know she met someone," I replied. "She's moving on, Derek. Maybe it's time you do the same." Derek didn't press for details, but I could tell he was grateful. He'd been living in misery for years, and Tina's disappearance was a gift he hadn't expected. As for me, I felt no guilt. Tina had sown the seeds of chaos in my life, and now she was reaping the harvest. That night, I sat in my man cave, sipping whiskey as I read Andre's latest update. "Tina arrived safely," his message read. "She's adjusting well. I'll wire the additional payment tomorrow." The The satisfaction I felt was cold but complete. Tina had underestimated me, just as Allie had. There's always a price to pay for betrayal, and I'd made sure they both paid in full. Tina's disappearance created a ripple effect, one that began quietly but soon grew into a storm. Derek, relieved to be free from her iron grip, filed for divorce almost immediately. He approached me at the local cafe not long after. "You have no idea how much better my life is now," he said, his voice low but charged with emotion. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" She was ruining me, Marcus, controlling everything. Now that she's gone, I finally feel like I can breathe. I took a sip of my coffee, letting his words hang in the air. "I'm glad you're finding peace, Derek." He hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "I don't know what happened, and I'm not asking. But if you had anything to do with her leaving, thank you." His gratitude caught me off guard, but I gave him a small nod. Sometimes life finds a way of setting things right. Despite Derek's relief, Tina's absence didn't go unnoticed. Her Wednesday night circle began whispering, theories spreading like wildfire. Some speculated she'd run off with a wealthy lover. Others hinted at something darker. Tina's sudden silence unnerved them all. A week later, I received another visit from the same detective who had questioned me about Allie. "She's missing, too," he said flatly, referring to Tina. "Starting to look like a pattern, don't you think?" I kept my expression neutral. "She's not missing. She left, just like Allie. Maybe you should ask why both women decided they were better off somewhere else." He narrowed his eyes, clearly searching for any hint of deception. "Funny how both of their last known interactions seem to involve you." "Coincidence," I said smoothly. "Or maybe I'm just a convenient scapegoat." His silence was long and heavy before he finally turned to leave. "We'll see." Tina's disappearance didn't cause the chaos I'd expected. It dismantled her circle entirely. Without her, the Wednesday night group fell apart. The women grew distant, and their husbands began asserting themselves in ways that had been impossible before. The house of cards Tina had built was collapsing, and I watched it all from the sidelines with quiet satisfaction. Derek reached out again a few weeks later, this time with a sheepish grin. "Marcus, I've been thinking," he said, "about all of this. Tina's gone, and Allie, I don't know. You seem like you've got it all figured out." I raised an eyebrow. "What are you getting at?" He hesitated, then leaned in closer. "Do you ever feel bad about moving on?" "Not once," I replied without hesitation. He nodded, his expression contemplative. "Then stop. Your life is your own now. Don't waste it looking back." As I drove home that night, I marveled at how far things had come. The weight that once suffocated me was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty that I'd done what needed to be done. But even as I celebrated my small victories, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over. The detective's suspicions, the whispers among Tina's old friends. Something was brewing, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep everything under control. For now, though, I savored the calm, knowing full well it wouldn't last forever. The weeks that followed were a careful balancing act. I maintained my routines, kept up appearances with the boys, and handled the whispers with quiet indifference. But the detective's visits became more frequent, and his questions more pointed. "You seem awfully calm for a man whose wife left him," he said during one visit, leaning against my doorframe with an air of suspicion. I accepted reality. I replied, my tone measured. "Sometimes people walk away. It's not my job to chase them." "Funny thing," he said, pulling out a small notebook. "Your name keeps coming up in conversations. First Allie, now Tina. 2 women gone and both connected to you. Care to explain?" "There's nothing to explain," I said, locking eyes with him. "They made their choices. Maybe you should ask why they were so unhappy." His visits were unsettling but predictable. Each time he left, I felt the tension building, a crack in the calm facade I'd worked so hard to maintain. I knew it was only a matter of time before he uncovered something that couldn't be explained away. Then one night, the storm finally broke. I was sitting in my man cave, reviewing emails when I heard a knock at the door. It was late, almost midnight, and my first instinct was to ignore it. But the knocking grew louder, more insistent. When I opened the door, I found a detective standing there, flanked by two uniformed officers. "Marcus Carter," he said coldly, "we need you to come with us." "For what?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Suspicion of involvement in the disappearance of Allie Carter and Tina Roberts," he replied. The ride to the station was silent, but my mind raced. I had been meticulous. Every detail planned, every loose end tied. What had they found? At the station, they placed me in a small, dimly lit room. The detective sat across from me, a folder in hand. He spread out a series of photos on the table. Allie's passport, the email exchange with Tina, and a grainy image of a man who vaguely resembled Andre Johnson. "You've been busy, Marcus," he said, tapping the photos. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You're smart," he said in a low voice. "Too smart for your own good. But smart men always leave a trail." They had nothing concrete, just circumstantial evidence and theories. I denied everything, remaining calm, but the interrogation dragged on for hours. By the time they released me, the sun, as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. The detective wasn't going to stop, and it was only a matter of time before he found something that couldn't be explained away. But what haunted me most wasn't the risk of getting caught. It was a realization that, despite everything I'd done to free myself, I wasn't free at all. That evening, as I sat alone in the house, the weight of my actions pressed down on me. Allie was gone. Tina was gone. And while I'd rid myself of the chaos they brought into my life, I couldn't escape the silence they'd left behind. For the first time, I wonder if I'd crossed a line for which I could never return. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. The silence of the house was no longer comforting. It felt oppressive, suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, seemed to whisper accusations I couldn't escape. I'd gotten everything I thought I wanted, but the emptiness filling the void was unbearable. The detective's words haunted me. Smart men always leave a trail. A week after that late-night interrogation, everything fell apart. I was in the kitchen making breakfast for the boys when the doorbell rang. This time, it wasn't a detective, it was Derek. His usually timid demeanor was gone, replaced by something harsher, darker. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Tina's gone," he said flatly, "and you're the reason why." "I know it." I froze, my mind racing. "What are you talking about?" "She left, Derek. You told me yourself you were happy to see her go." His lips twisted into a bitter smile. Until I started asking questions. Until I realized she wouldn't just vanish without a reason. He placed a folder on the table and opened it. Inside were printouts of emails, photos, and even a copy of the dark web listing I created for Allie. My stomach dropped as I stared at the evidence. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Derek's expression hardened. "I hired someone, a private investigator. Turns out you're not as careful as you think." I clenched my fists, struggling to maintain my composure. "What do you want, Derek?" "I want the truth," he said, leaning forward. "I don't care about the cops, and I don't want revenge. I just want to know what you did to them." I hesitated, the weight of my secrets pressing down on me. But before I could respond, the door burst open, and a detective stormed in with a team of officers. "Marcus Carter, you're under arrest," he declared, his voice echoing through the house. The boys screamed as I was handcuffed and let out the door. I tried to keep my head high, but the shame was overwhelming. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, watching as I was shoved into the back of a squad car. At the station, the detective didn't hold back. "We've traced your transactions, Marcus," he said, slamming a stack of documents onto the table. "The wire transfers, the dark web activity, the emails. You thought you covered your tracks, but you didn't." I said nothing. My silence was more damning than any confession. The trial was swift. The prosecution painted me as a cold, calculating monster, and the evidence was overwhelming. The defense tried arguing that I'd been pushed to my breaking point, but it wasn't enough. The judge's words were final and unrelenting. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. As I sat in my cell, the reality of my actions finally sank in. I had destroyed Allie, Tina, and myself in the process. The boys were now living with my sister, their lives forever altered by my choices. Revenge had consumed me, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. Months later, I received a letter. It was from Andre. Your wife has adjusted well to her new life. She's become a star in our clubs, adored by the patrons. You were right. She's a remarkable woman. I crumpled the letter and stared out the tiny window of my cell, the weight of my choices bearing down on me. I had wanted freedom, but instead, I had locked myself in a cage of my own making. The silence of our home had been replaced by the silence of prison walls, and the life I once knew was nothing more than a distant memory. Revenge had its price, and I had paid it in full. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Got thoughts or experiences you'd like to share? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.